So in the last session, we discussed about role-based access control. As a part of role-based access control, we discussed primarily we have four type of roles: job role, duty role, data role, abstract role. These four roles we have up to release 11. After release 11 means from release 12. So this role is not available as a part of standard roles. So equal to that, we follow the manual process of mapping. We use our primary ledger to specific role. That is a point we discussed. The data role concept is not applicable from release 12. Now anyway, we are going to work on latest version, that is release 13. And we discussed few other points. What is the meaning of job role, duty role, right? Abstract role, data role, those points we discussed. Hope that is clear to everyone. And we discussed about the versions. When we talk about release 11 and 12, what exactly the version, the naming you have, you can identify in the system that we discussed. And apart from that, we just discuss a few points on Fusion users. Basically, users are classified into two types in the Fusion: implementation user and employee user. We cannot create employee user directly in the fresh environment. Okay, the reason to create the employee user, we require legal entity and a business unit. So for that reason, normally what we do, we create implementation user, and with the help of implementation user, we can start configuring the system. Once we are ready with the LE and BU, we can create employee user. When you create implementation user, you cannot assign any employee to implementation user. Only when we create employee user, the employee user will have association with the employee. The name itself employee user. That means we create user for employee. That only we call as employee user. Okay. So these are the points we discussed, and a few other points we'll just see which are related to users. So when you create implementation user, okay, when you create implementation user, what are the basic roles we have to assign to start working as an implementation consultant? So for implementation user, okay, there are few key roles which need to be assigned. Those roles are application implementation consultant role, and the IT security manager, and role called as employee. So these three roles we have to assign as a very basic roles for implementation user. When you create implementation user, we have to assign these three roles so that that user will have full privileges to the system to complete any application related configuration. So what is the purpose of application implementation consultant role? This role will give the access to any user to do the configuration. Okay, configuration. Which application configuration? Any application configuration. So when we talk about EBS, in EBS, if you assign accounts payable supervisor responsibility to, say, XYZ user, the XYZ user can perform payables related configuration only. But in Fusion, if you assign application implementation consultant role to any user, that user can do any application related configuration. So basically, if you assign this role to user, the user will have access to FSM. Okay, FSM. User will have access to FSM. FSM stands for Functional Setup Manager. So this is the place where we do any application related configuration. You can create your calendars, chart of accounts, primary ledgers, legal entities, okay, and AP configuration, AR configuration, assets configuration, purchasing, OEM inventory, any application configuration we can complete in the environment called as FSM. Okay, functional setup manager. How to get access to functional setup manager? with the help of this role. The application implementation consultant role will allow us to access function setup manager FSM. With the help of functional setup manager, you can do the configuration. Which application configuration? Any application configuration you can do. Okay, this is the point we have to understand when you talk about this application implementation consultant role. And we have other role called as IT security manager. So if you assign IT security manager role to implementation user, that user will get access to create the new users. Create new users. If you want to allow any user to create another new users, we have to assign the IT security manager. If you assign IT security manager role to any user, that user will get access to security console. If any user will have access to security console, from security console what we can do? We can create the new users and you can do the maintenance. You can maintain these users, like where we can reset the passwords and user account related maintenance we can do. Apart from that, we can create the, so let me just go with the other points also. We can create the new users and we can assign the roles. Okay, if you want to assign any role to user, that is possible from security console only. From here only you can create the custom roles. So these and all you can perform from security console. Okay, admin related activities. From security console we can create users and you can reset the passwords. That sort of activities you can perform, and you can assign the roles to user, and if you want you can create the custom roles. This all can be performed from security console. If any user require access to security console, what we have to do is we have to assign role called as IT manager role, IT security manager role to that user, so that that user will have access to security console, so that that user can perform all these activities. And employee role. In EBS, if you have access to specific responsibility, you can navigate to SRS window. After navigating to SRS window, for that responsibility, if any request group is associated, you will be able to submit the job, or you will be able to submit the program or report. If no request group is associated with that responsibility, still you can access to a SRS window, but when you click on LOV, you don't find any report or program name within that. But system will allow you to navigate to that window, SRS window. But in Fusion, if you assign the role called as employee, then only system will allow you to have access to that similar window. In EBS, SRS window, we know, right? SRS window, it stands for standard request submission. Okay, request to submit the request, this is the window we use. And similar to this, in Fusion we have ESS job page. ESS stands for Enterprise Scheduler Service. Okay, equal to SRS window. In EBS, SRS window we have, from where we can go and submit the programs or reports. So similar to that, in Fusion we have page called as, okay, here this is in EBS, SRS is a form, so we are calling as window. Here, since there is a web pages, simply we are calling as ESS job page. In EBS, through SRS you can submit the program. The program can be some process related or report related. In Fusion, each program we are calling as a job only. It can be report or some program we call as a job. That is the reason name also they given as ESS job page. ESS stands for Enterprise Scheduler Service job. Okay, we can just go to this ESS job page. From there you can submit any report, okay, or any program, but report or program simply we call as job. So from this page you can submit any report or program. Okay, if you want to have access to this SRS window in EBS, you can do that from any responsibility. Additional privileges are not required. Okay, if any request group is associated with that responsibility, the user can submit. Otherwise, at least the user can navigate to SRS window. But in Fusion, if you want to have access to this ESS job page, you have to assign the role called as employee role to user. If you assign employee role to the user, that user only can have access to ESS job page. Not only ESS job page, okay, there are many other functions which can be provisioned to any user through employee role only. Many other functions which are related to self-service. So employee can go and submit expense reports. For expense report, access can be possible through employee role only. If you assign employee role to any user, that user can have access to expense report creation page. So that's how there are many functions which are connected with the employee role. That is the reason for any user it's recommended to assign these three roles. Okay, here simply you can say self-service web pages. Okay, self-service functions you can say. Fine. So just try to understand these three role purposes. So when you create implementation user, or if you create user for consultant, okay, we have to assign these three roles: application implementation consultant, IT security manager, and employee role. So what is the use of application implementation consultant? With the help of this role, user can, or say consultant can do the system related configuration. IT security manager will give the access to any user to create the new users, or to maintain the existing user accounts, or to to assign the roles to that user, or to create the custom roles altogether. Okay, we require IT security manager role. That role will give the access to security console. From security console only we can do all these activities. And the other role is employee. Employee role will give the access to self-service functions. Okay, employee related, some employee related portal related access, or some expense report submission, or if you want to submit any report or anything, so it will allow that employee role will give the access to ESS job page. Okay, from here only you can submit any report or program. Okay, so this is what we have to understand. And if you assign, say you have a ABC user, say you created as an employee, say ABC user is employee user, XYZ user is implementation user. If you assign these three roles to implementation user, the implementation user, anyway, name we given as implementation, purpose we created as for implementation. Just if you create implementation user, that user cannot do anything. You have to assign these three roles, then only reality the user can work in the system environment as implementation consultant. If you assign these three roles to ABC user, who is the ABC user? Employee user. Okay, the employee user name is ABC. If you assign these three roles to employee user called ABC, the ABC user can start acting as implementation user. How you can decide who is implementation user based on the roles which you assign? And other point is from where user we are creating.
1 second there, Lakshman.
Yeah, please.
I have a question here. So, yeah, you're saying employee user as ABC and something you have created like implementation user employee. I'm just confused with both of them.
Now, see, definition point of view, we create implementation user from security console. Okay, employee user we create from HCM, right? That's what we discussed in the last session. So employee user you can create from HCM, implementation user you can create from security console. Okay.
Okay.
Fine. We'll go with simple example. Let me remove this. Say you created employee users. You can mute from your end, please. When you have question, you can raise that point later when we discuss. You can unmute so that we can avoid the background noise, please. Fine. We'll go with a simple example. So employee user we can create from HCM. Say for example, I'm creating three users as employee users: user A, user B, user C. And I'm creating users from security console. Generally, from security console, what are the users we create? Those we call as implementation users. Means for the purpose of implementation only, we create the users from security console. Say I'm creating three users from security console: X, Y, and G. I created. Now what I'll do is I will assign these three roles to user called as X. User X we created as implementation user. That means we created from security console. Which user you create from security console, that user you call as implementation user. But that user cannot act as a real implementation user until unless you assign these roles. Now I'm say for example, we are going to create these three users from security console. The three by default you can call it as implementation users. But to act as implementation user, they required privileges. Okay, they require privileges. Which privileges implementation user required? These three roles. Say these three roles I am assigning to user called as X. So X, Y, G, three users are implementation users, but only X is going to have a privileges really to work as implementation user in the system environment. Okay, X is implementation user, Y is implementation user, G is implementation user, but for X only you are assigning these roles. Okay, so that means the X is implementation user, and because we are assigning the required roles, then X can really work on the instance as a implementation user. But Y and G are implementation users only, but no permissions for them to act as implementation users in the system environment. Okay, if I assign these three roles to employee user called as C, since C is going to have access to these three roles, C can act as implementation user even the C is reality employee user. That means the roles will decide what sort of privileges the user has. But in terms of place of definition, source of definition, if you create user from HCM, you can call as employee user. If you create user from security console, you can call as implementation user. You may create multiple users from security console. You can say these three are implementation users. For which users you are giving required privileges, those users only really can act as implementation user or implementation consultants. Is it clear, or any point you want to understand here?
Yeah, it's clear. So these three roles, are mandatory for an implementation user.
Yes,
right?
Mandatory. The reason implementation user should do the configuration, implementation user should work on the new users creation, roles assignment, role customization. Definitely every user require access to the job submissions and basic other functions. That is the reason these three are mandatory roles, we can say.
Hello?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, can rules be attached to an employee user?
I'm sorry.
Hello?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Can these roles be attached to an employee user?
Any user you can assign.
Okay.
Yeah. The three roles you can assign to employee user, implementation user. When you start with a fresh implementation, okay, we cannot create employee user. Okay, so we can create only implementation user. That is the reason from security console we create implementation user. So we'll assign these roles. Once we are ready with the legal entry and business units and primary ledger definitions, we'll ignore the implementation user. We create employee user and we'll proceed with these three roles. We'll assign to employee user only. That's how we'll proceed with the configuration. We have few more points to understand how these two are different, but just try to understand this point. Any questions here, please?
So Lakshman, hello.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So if we assign these three roles to both the employees in the employee or the implementation user at that time, in terms of what access they can get in the system and what they can do in the
These
system?
three roles will give the access to which areas? These three areas, right? So if
Correct.
you assign these three roles to employee user, implementation user, employee user can do the configuration, implementation user also can do the configuration. Employee user can have access to security console, implementation user. Employee and implementation, both users can have access to self-service functions.
Okay. So there would be no difference.
There is a difference.
Lakshman,
With respect to these roles, no difference. But there is one more point which we have to understand how these two users are different when we are working on the system process. We'll talk on that. First, let's get clarity on this. Then I'll just add that point also. There is one difference, one point which you have to understand. But role point of view, just try to understand. Yeah.
Lakshman, so it means that the implementation user is required only at the time of initial stages.
Exactly. Later, we don't require implementation user. Once you are ready with your legal entities and do business units.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So once you create this implementation user and give him these three roles,
Yeah.
we ignore this guy, we go to HCM and the system will allow us to create a user there, correct?
Yes. See, HCM user, employee user, access you'll have even if you don't take subscription from Oracle for HCM, because that comes under a very common task. Okay. If you are going to implement only financials also, you'll have access to that employee user definition, because employee user definition is required to work on any area of application.
Okay. So what restricts us at the start from creating a user with HCM then? Only the legal entity business, BG and the ledger and all?
Exactly. Yes. As we discussed in the yesterday's session, if you want to create the employee
Okay.
user, okay, LE and BUs, you have to keep it ready.
Okay.
Okay.
So I have a basic question, but even before this, so what is the org structure? Basically, the hierarchy of the org structure with Fusion.
Pavan, just we are going to discuss that the same. Just we have as the scheduled topic
Okay.
today, and actually
Fine.
we just planned to discuss all these in the yesterday's session itself, but we could not get that much time to finish. So we discussed about role-based access control. Then when we were discussing Fusion users related information, just we end up with that scheduled time. So we stopped there. So there are a few.
Yeah, okay, no worries.
We are discussing. After this, we'll just jump into Fusion architecture. Then we'll talk about enterprise structure. Yep.
Sure. Okay.
Fine. Any other
Lakshman.
questions here, please?
Yeah, Lakshman, this is Suri here.
Please.
Who do assign a functional user, like application implementation consultant or IT security manager?
When you say functional user, employee, right, will be working on the application. That's what you are referring, right?
Employee can be different, I guess, as per my understanding. I mean, they can raise expenses, they can access their transactions as well.
Could you please repeat
Second
the
one-
question, please?
I mean, who assign responsibility of functional user?
Eh,
In the last session,
What do you
we were
mean?
discussing
What do you mean by functional user? Functional user is nothing but employee only. Will be working in the organization, will be working on the business process, right?
Okay.
That is the meaning of functional user. So say you have a payables department, there are people who are working in the payables department to just process the invoices and payments. We call them as a functional users. Okay.
Okay.
So all the functional users as a part of implementation, so consultant will create. As a consultant, we will create. So we'll be creating the function, those users from any user. Being an implementation user, you can create, or else being an employee user, you can create. How this user or this user will have access to that employee user creation? Because of those three roles. Primarily IT security manager. who has access to IT security manager, that user can create functional users. Nothing but application users will be working on the application business process. Okay. So anyone can have IT security manager role access. That could be implementation user or employee user. They will be able to create IT security manager. I mean, they'll be able to create the functional users or any other users. Any other questions, please?
All the contingent workers to be created from security console only, right?
No. So when we are creating the employee user, there will be having option whether you want to create employee or contingent worker. So you have to choose, and you can create from security console. As we discussed, through security console, you cannot map that user with any employee. It is just user without any mapping. We'll give the name, username and password, and if you want to assign the roles, you can assign. You cannot map the user with any employee which you create from security console. So the full-time employee, the employee or contingent worker, you can create as an employee user only. As a part of employee user, you can select employee or contingent worker.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions here, please? Fine, no questions. Okay. So this is all about just to understand, like when you start with a fresh instance, okay. So we cannot create employee user. We have to start with our implementation related configuration with implementation user only. So, okay, when you start with the implementation user, what roles required? These are the roles. What is the purpose? These are the points we have to understand. So these roles can be assigned to any user. There are no limitations. Okay. So you can assign to any user, implementation user or employee user. These are the few points to understand. Apart from this, when it comes to application related access, is there any difference in terms of accessing the application between these two users? We'll see that. One user is implementation user. So let me write that security console. From security console, you can create the implementation user. From HCM, Human Capital Management, HRMS, we can create employee user. So this you can call as employee user or application user. As somebody mentioned, functional user. All are the same. Okay. We'll be accessing the application. That user is application user, and we'll be working on specific functions. That user is functional user. Definitely that application user are functional users in the organization point of view, employees only. Okay, so this is the point we have to understand, right? So now we have two users, implementation user and employee user. Implementation user we normally create from security console, and employee user we create from HCM. Now say you created user called as A from security console. We treat as an implementation user. Say you assigned these three roles to user A. Say we are creating one more user from HCM as employee user. The user name is B. Say for user B also we assign these three roles. That means the definition point of view, these two users are different. One is created from security console, other one is created from HCM. So based on the source of definition, we are calling as these users are implementation user and employee user. Okay. So as we discussed, with employee user only we can associate LEs and BUs. With this user you cannot associate anything. And these three roles we assign to these two users. Now when you talk about setups, okay, so since these three roles we are assigning to user A and user B, two users will have equal privileges when they do the setups. When it comes to financials, only one difference you can see, that is supplier sites. Supplier sites. The question is, who can create the supplier sites and who cannot create the supplier sites? First we'll see that point, later we'll see why. Okay. When you talk about supplier sites can be created by user B only. Supplier sites can be created by user B only. What is the reason? The supplier user B is employee user. That means only employee user can create the supplier sites in the system. Implementation user, here as per our example A cannot create supplier sites. Suppliers can be created by implementation user and employee users. Okay, when you talk about suppliers, we know in EBS, right? We create supplier and supplier sites. Supplier can be created by any user, implementation user or employee user. The user which you create from security console or HCM, both users can create suppliers. But when you talk about supplier sites can be created by employee user only. That is the first point you have to understand. Implementation user cannot create supplier sites. What is the reason? The reason is they given the just condition in the application, the user who is acting as a buyer. Okay, the user who is acting as a buyer, that user only can create supplier site. Here the same buyer we are calling as a procurement agent. Okay, only buyer can create supplier site. Here the buyer only, they are giving the name as procurement agent. So only procurement agent can create the
Lakshman, I have a
1 second please.
question here.
Don't mind, let me just complete some set of
Yeah, sure.
information. Definitely we'll discuss on your queries. Okay, yeah. So only procurement agent can create supplier sites. So we know how to make one employee as a buyer in EBS. Just we have to create the employee, we have to go to the buyer form, we have to add that employee in the buyers list, then that employee will start acting as a buyer in EBS case. Here also same logic is applicable. So the point is only procurement agent. Who is a procurement agent? Nothing but buyer only. Okay, instead of giving the name as a buyer, they given the term as a procurement agent. Both are equal. Only procurement agent can create supplier sites. Now the question is, here we have two type of users, implementation user and employee user, whom we can make as a procurement agent, whom we cannot create as a procurement agent. When you talk about that point, the point is only employee user can be created as procurement agent. Okay, we have two type of users, implementation user and employee user. Only employee user can be created as a procurement agent. Only procurement agent can create the supplier side. Now these are the 2 points we have to understand. If you have any questions, please.
Is it not the same in EBS also? Like one has to be a buyer to do all these things. How is it different from
In EBS also, only you can create employee as a buyer. Okay, that employee you will be associating with the user. That's how you will establish the connectivity.
Yeah.
And one more point, in EBS, if you want to create supplier and supplier site, it's not mandatory. System won't look at the user who is creating to that user employee is associated or not, it won't look for. When we are creating the procurement document, system will verify the user is classified as a buyer or not to approve the documents or rest of activities. Right? In EBS, if you have access to that specific function, supplier creation function, any user can create. It doesn't matter whether employee is associated that user or not. Okay, so here system will look for that point.
Okay.
Yeah. So based on these two statements, any questions from anyone, please? finance point of view, there's no much difference between employee user and implementation user when we work on the system with any one of the user except this point. When you are working on financials, you can work on the system with any user. Okay, so only the point is you cannot create the supplier side from implementation user, since implementation user is not an employee user. Only employee user can be converted as a procurement agent. Only procurement agent can create the supplier sides.
You know why the reason they kept it?
So the reason is, okay, the reason is just they made, like, in the organization point of view, normally the sites and all need to be managed by the employees only. Okay, the employees only. And when one more point, there is another point also which you have to consider here. So again, in the system they set a control. Say for example you have 10 business units, nothing but operating units as per EBS. So you are acting as a procurement agent for which business unit? Only for that business unit sites only you can assign to specific BU. Let me talk about this point. Say you have a BU1, BU is equal to OU in EBS.
It's like segregation of duties, I think. Is that correct?
Yeah, segregation of some privileges. Duties, definitely. When you say the procurement agent, that is one of the duty, and along with that, who has which privileges. But this more impact you can see when you talk about procurement. In EBS case, so if you have a buyer can create any document. But in the fusion, you have to go and specify the specific procurement agent. When you are creating the procurement agent, when you are creating the employee user as a procurement agent, the procurement agent can have access to which documents, which data, whether the procurement agent can have access to other agent related documents. If yes, view only privileges or modify privileges or full privileges, all the controls they built, the rules they define. So say for example you have 5 BUs and you are creating, you have a user called as B, employee user. You are making employee user B as a procurement agent for BU1. Okay, for BU1, okay, you have an employee user called as B. You are making employee user B as a procurement agent to BU1. Now this B can create any supplier site. That site B can create supplier site. Why? B is a procurement agent. Because B is a procurement agent, B can create supplier sites. So say these 5 BUs we have. This procurement agent B can assign that supplier site to only BU1. The reason is the procurement B is procurement agent only for BU1. Okay. To set up this sort of rules, they came up with that control. Okay, we'll see when we are creating the procurement agent, you can see what are the additional privileges and all. There you can understand. As of now, that functionality point of view, when we are going to work on financials, okay, so which user will have which privileges to understand. Okay, here is only one point which will differentiate these two users.
When they create the supplier site, now they don't need to select the operating unit. Automatically the operating or BU which is assigned to that user will be assigned to that supplier site.
No. You should select and you have to assign.
But you're saying the other
I'll tell you one point. So you have one employee whom you created as a procurement agent for 5 BUs. Okay. Now that procurement agent is creating one site. Now you tell me which BU has to be defaulted. How system knows?
So you're saying it can be assigned with 5 BUs?
Yes. That is a manual task. System won't automate. The reason is that one site can be assigned to multiple BUs.
Yes, that's right.
As a general practice, one procurement agent normally will be working for one BU. Maybe in some cases more than one. But system point of view, they give an option. So manually the assignment need to be done by procurement agent. Okay, that's how it works.
Lakshman here,
Yeah.
employee user is nothing but a person who is doing
Employee only.
in payables, who process invoices, payments, and
Correct.
AR who creates billing.
Yes, you are right. Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Fine.
What is the meaning of self-service functions, and can you give examples? Because I was wondering, when an implementation user has a self-service function which makes him an employee, then he qualifies for an employee, and that employee can be attached as a procurement agent. So I think I'm not able to understand self-service function. That's why I got that question.
So irrespective of if you are employee, by default you should have access to few self-service functions in your organization. The rest of self-service functions you can have depending on for which department you are working. Here when you say self-service function, any employee should have access to their employee records, okay, which are maintained by HRMS. And any employee should have access to their payslip, and any employee require access to go and submit the expense reports if they incur some expense. So these are common functions which need to be accessed by any employee in the organization. Those privileges you can get through employee role if it is assigned to user. And rest of self-service depends on your department. You are working for which process, which department. Based on that you may get it. Those need to be assigned through other roles. Okay.
So every employee can do expense report now?
Every employee can do if you assign the role called as employee. And one more point, within this employee role will have a privilege called as expense report. Say you have a 10 employees. For a 5 employees only you want to give the expense report creation privilege. In that case, what you can do is, this is a seeded role what Oracle provides. You make a copy of this role and remove that expense report function from that role, which you treat as a custom role that you assign to those 5 employees who doesn't need access to expense report creation. We can customize as per our requirement. How we customize the menus in EBS. Okay.
Do we need to assign user the employee role to run the reports or submit the reports?
Yes. Here when you talk about reports, if you go to detail point, here we have two options. The reports, one place is to run the reports as we discussed, ESS job page, Enterprise Scheduler Service job page. That is a one. And the other one is we have a access to BI catalog page. So these, from the two places you can run the reports. To have access to that any one or two places, the employee role is required. Or else you do one thing. You don't want to assign employee role. So you can go and include the report related functions which are part of this employee, those two functions in this role. That means you have to treat that is not a seeded, that is customized by adding some additional privileges. So any privilege you can add into any role. That's how you can modify, you can just customize. Okay, or else as a part of seeded roles, which privileges will be available through which role I am trying to explain.
You're saying we can assign some duty roles which has access to the reports.
Yes.
Create a custom job role.
Into any duty role, you can include into any job role. I'll tell you one more
duty
point.
roles specific to reports.
One second. What we discussed, these 3 roles you have to assign to the user. So you are not interested to assign these 3 roles. What you can do is, this is a seeded one. You just make a copy of application implementation consultant role and include these IT security manager and employee roles into this application implementation consultant. Then you are ready to you are ready with one user to have access to all these privileges. Reason, these 2 are also included within this. So seeded one you can see as application implementation consultant, and this you can name it as a custom. Why you are making it as custom, you included these also into this. If you assign this one role, application implementation consultant custom, this will give the access to all these, since these privileges you are getting from these which are assigned to this role. That's how you can play with these roles. I am trying to explain how we have as a part of seeded. Okay.
Lakshman, is customization? Lakshman?
Please go ahead.
Yeah, customization is allowed here in this scenario. Customization is allowed.
Which customization you are talking about?
You're just talking. I have heard of the in Oracle Fusion customization is not allowed.
Role customization. Role.
Okay.
In EBS we can do menu customization, right? Through sysadmin.
Yeah.
That we can do. And when you talk about customizations in the cloud, possible and not possible, that totally depends on which subscription you are taking. If you take SaaS subscription that we discussed in the first session, but just will go very high level. In case of SaaS, functional related customizations are not allowed. Reports customization you can do. If you go with a PaaS model, platform as a service, that will allow you any customizations. That's it.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes. So any other questions here, please?
Yeah, I have one question regarding the roles. So roles determine so would have access to?
No, we lost what you are speaking in between. Could you please repeat your question?
Does role determine what BU and legal entity and primary ledger a user can have access to?
Yes. What we do is,
and we don't
see, roles are like, those are very much standalone. What we have to do is, say you have a role called as payables manager. This is one of the role which we have for AP. Along with that, we have a few other roles also, like payables supervisor, payables specialist, which are seeded. Now you have this payables manager. Now you can decide you want to give access to which business unit. Just it's all about assigning the BU to this role. Okay, BU1 you assign, and BU2 also you want to assign to the payables manager. Assign BU2 also. Now if you assign these two roles, okay, this combination to one user can have access to these two BUs. Yes, roles will determine how the responsibilities will determine access to operating units or primary ledgers in EBS. Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions here, please? So finance point of view, only one point we have to understand when you talk about these two users. From implementation user, the user which you create from security console, from that user you cannot create supplier sites. The reason is only procurement agent can create supplier sites. Here you cannot make implementation user which you create from security console as procurement agent. You can create only employee user as a procurement agent. That is the reason you can create supplier sites from procurement agent. Say as per this example, we have user A and user B. User B is employee user. Can you create supplier sites from employee B? No, directly no. If you convert this employee user B as a procurement agent, then only you can create the sites. Just because of employee user you cannot. Employee user need to be converted as a procurement agent, then only that user can create the supplier site. And when we talk about purchasing, yeah, please go ahead.
Sorry, you can complete.
When we talk about purchasing,
Hello.
Yeah, please.
Hello, Lakshman.
Please.
Sandeep here. Like employee user is like an end user in R2, like V2.
Yes, exactly. We'll be working on the application. Accountants.
Okay, here it is like we can't do any additional function until unless we assigned it like particular we need to do and so business with that particular application access.
You see, in EBS what we do, we assign the responsibility to user, right?
Yes.
The same way here we assign the role. And we provision the access to specific business unit or specific ledger.
Okay, like as per the R12, we can do any function once it assigned, but here we can restrict it wherever we want.
No. Not all the functions, only supplier site related point only you have to understand. Rest all will work same as EBS only. In EBS, you can give any provision to any user through response custom menu. Here through custom role, you can give the same privileges to any user or any business user.
I got it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So here my request is, please, if you have a questions, if you are interested to raise the questions, please make sure that you don't have background noise. Okay, because we are recording these sessions. Before that, we have three participants who are just attending these sessions. That may create some disturbance to this session. So that is the reason. Just I'm requesting, please make sure that you don't have background noise, and please consider our request. Then it goes very smooth. Fine, done. So any other questions here, please? Any other questions? If no, and one more point, let me add here. So finance point of view, this is only the point. So implementation user and employee user, with the given these three roles, can work on the application, any setups and all. If this any user want to record the transactions, for that we have a separate roles. Those roles are different that we'll be discussing. But when you talk about purchasing, in the purchasing, implementation user cannot create any document, requisition or purchase order. Any document you want to create which are related to purchasing, those can be done by only procurement agent. Only procurement agent can create any procurement related documents, not implementation user. But in finance point of view, implementation user or employee user, any user can create finance related documents, invoices, payments and receivables, transactions, receipts and fixed assets, asset definitions, or anything can be performed by implementation or employee user, okay, based on the privileges which you are giving. In procurement purchasing side, even if you give privileges to implementation user, okay, which privileges are required to create the purchase orders and all requisition purchase orders, that user cannot do. The reason is the definition point of view, the implementation user will be created from security console. The user which you create from security console, you cannot convert as a procurement agent. So here the point is, we have to understand only procurement agent can create procurement documents, not any other user. Okay. So this is all about user part, which you have to understand here. Whatever the roles, three roles we are talking about, those required for consultants to do the system configuration. If any user wants to work on invoice creation or payment creation or receivables billing or receipt, for that to work on the application related documents creation or process, we have a separate roles. Just try to understand, we have the broad level classification for roles as a configuration related roles, I mean to say setup related roles and process related roles. If you take simple example in EBS, you create payables super user responsibility by selecting AP navigate GUI 1-2 menu. So that menu consists of access to setup part as well as transaction part. You can go with the navigation setup options, payable options and other setups, all you can do. Within the same navigator on top, you can see invoice entry, invoices, invoice entry, invoice payment, payment entry, payments, you can perform all those things. That means one menu consists access for setup part as well as transaction part. But in Fusion, they segregated. For setup, we have a separate roles. For process, we have a separate roles. But in few process related roles, which setups need to be performed by end users or accountants as a part of business process, those they included as a part of transaction roles also. We'll see those in upcoming sessions. For now, this is the point you have to understand. Okay, when you talk about Fusion users, the two type of users and the roles which need to be assigned to any user who is going to act as a consultant on the application. So these three roles need to be assigned. And when you see the implementation user and employee user, okay, so this is the point you have to understand. Implementation user cannot create supplier sites, only procurement agent can create. Okay, who can become procurement agent? Only employee user, okay, can be created as a procurement agent. See, okay, employee user can be converted as a procurement agent. Only procurement agent can create supplier sites. Okay. So implementation user cannot be created as a procurement agent. With that reason, implementation user cannot create supplier sites. So any questions here, please? If no questions, we can move to next topic.
Yeah, I have one question.
Please.
So, like you said, the employee user, we associate the procurement agent to it. And then you also mentioned the point that the procurement agent can have access to one or multiple BUs. Accordingly, the procurement would have the access. So, and then on the other side, we also said that the role would have access to the BUs. So which one is procurement agent a role, or
Yeah, the point.
is it a different role?
One second.
That's a little confusing to me.
I got your point. Say I'm creating the procurement agent called as A. So I'll say I created employee user. Employee user A and B. Okay, I created two employee users. I'm creating A as procurement agent for BU1, and I'm creating employee user B as procurement agent for BU1 or BU2. You can take any example. Now what I'm going to do is, for user A and user B we have, right? Okay. For user A, okay, user A is employee user as well as procurement agent. For user A, I'm going to assign one role called as payables manager. For employee B also I'm going to assign payables manager. But for employee A, what are the role I assigned as a payables manager? For this, I'm going to assign BU called as BU1. Then the A can work for BU1 as a payables manager. Okay, B cannot work on the system for BU2 even it is assigned as a payables manager. Then why we are assigning here? This user B can create supplier site and the site can be assigned to BU2, only that purpose. Otherwise, if you are going to use user B in the procurement, this B can create, okay, can create the documents if you give the access to the procurement related roles and to the roles if you assign BU2. Or else just forget about procurement, you talk about this. Just let's look at our finance side. Okay, take this example. We have two users, employee users A and B. A we created as a procurement agent for BU1, and B we created a procurement agent for BU2, or else take BU1 only. For two users we created as a procurement agents for BU1, and for user A we are assigning payables manager. B also we are assigning. For A related role we are assigning BU. For B related role we are not assigning. Now A is procurement agent, and same time the A has access to BU1 for this payables manager. So A can work for BU1 and B cannot work for BU1 as a payables manager. Reason, what is the role we assign? For the role we didn't assign BU. Then what is the advantage of this assignment? This B can create supplier site. That site can be assigned to BU1. To give that privilege, we are allowing B to create supplier sites and to assign those sites only to BU1. Okay, or else you created BU as a procurement agent for BU1 and BU2. Then B can create one supplier site. If required, that supplier site can be assigned to BU1 as well as BU2. Okay, but that is limited to creating sites and assigning only. When it comes to transactions, separate role is required. For the separate role, you have to assign the BU also. Is it clear?
Yes, clear. Thank you.
Fine. Any other questions here, please? once we get into the application, we'll get more clarity. Okay, so you can understand other points also. But in this case, these are the information which is required before we go and create those respective definitions or other stuff. So any questions from anyone, please? If no questions, just we can jump to next concept called as fusion architecture. Any questions from anyone, please? Any sort of question?
Hi, Lakshman. I have a question.
Please.
Yeah. So you said we need to create we need to assign a business unit to a procurement agent to be able to create PO and requisition for that BU. Right?
Yeah. When we are creating the procurement agent, we have to select the business unit, and for that business unit, which documents we want to allow that procurement agent to create, that we have to select. You select it.
Oh, that also we have to select.
Yeah, you select. Yeah, you select it, but you cannot create. The reason is you need access to that relevant role also.
Okay, that's fine. We will assign the roles, and then we will assign the responsibilities to that. But my question is that suppose I make a procurement agent for a business unit B1, and I gave him a role to create PO and requisitions. Now, can he create PO and requisitions for B2? He cannot, right? We have to again assign B2.
Whether the buyer procurement agent can create the documents or not for that BU, that will depends on at the time of procurement agent definition, which privileges you given.
Okay.
See, you create the procurement agent, right? When you create the procurement agent, say I am going to create one procurement agent called as A. A is employee user. I am creating as a procurement agent. A I created as a procurement agent. When I am creating the procurement agent, I should select for which BU I am creating A as a procurement agent for BU 10. In this definition, I have to select, I want to allow this procurement agent to create just requisitions. That's all. Then this procurement agent can create requisitions only for BU 10.
Yeah, that's my question. So he cannot create requisitions for any other business unit, right?
Exactly. Reason? This procurement
is only assigned to BU.
Only agent for BU 10.
Okay.
That's it.
And another question that leads to my second question is, so now I can have an implementation user, but I cannot create even PO with and requisitions for that implementation user. Is that correct? He can.
Correct.
He can only do
correct. And let me ask you the question: why? Of course, I answered.
Because he's not assigned to any business unit.
No. Because implementation user is not a employee user.
Procurement agent.
Yeah, before procurement agent, not employee user.
Okay.
Right. Only employee user.
But implementation user can create invoices and other things, right?
Any other
That's
documents
what you said.
they can create. Yes.
Okay.
Thank
you.
Yep.
So Lakshman, just one last question on this. So here, if we assign a role which would give access to creation of PO, can user then create the PO, or would it not be able to create PO because
now
procurement agent
case only? We'll take this case only.
Restriction is.
We'll take this case only. So we have a employee user A and procurement agent. We just are selecting this BU for that procurement agent, and I given the permission to create requisition. Now I will assign the role called as a purchasing manager role to this user.
Right.
So a purchasing manager role will give the access to requisition creation, purchase orders, receipts also. So for this role, I am going to assign BU 10. Sorry, BU 10. Now the A will have access to the system as a purchasing manager, okay, and he will get connected to BU 10. When that user will try to create the purchase order, the purchase order function would be available within the purchasing manager. When you try to click on that, system will verify Who is creating? Yes, procurement agent only. Procurement agent for this BU has access to purchase orders or not, it will verify. If already access is given, then only it will allow. Otherwise, even the user is acting as a purchasing manager for this BU. Since permissions are not given, the user cannot create.
Okay.
Clear?
Thank you.
Yeah. So these are the points we have to understand when we talk about this. Any questions from anyone, please? It's almost 9:20.
Hi. Can a procurement agent have access to more than one BUs?
Yes. It's all about creating the same employee user as a procurement agent for multiple BUs, one after one. Okay, I'll go to the procurement agent creation function. I'll select BU. I'll select that agent employee, and I'll give the privileges. I'll save it. I want to make the same employee as a procurement agent for other BU. Same process. Select other BU, select the same employee, and give privileges. This is how you can the multiple definitions you can make it. We don't have any option where in a single shot we can select employee and we cannot list out the BUs. The reason documents access also need to be provided for that. That's how they designed that solution. The answer is yes for your question. Yes, one procurement agent can act as a can be associated with the multiple BUs. The definition should be done separately. Any other?
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So already we reached 9:20, so we can wind up the session with this topic only for today. In tomorrow's session, we'll talk about the above three which are pending to understand to start with the system. So if you have any other questions from prior sessions or today's session related to this course, please raise your question so that we can talk on that. Or from previous sessions, if you have some clarity you require, maybe some guys gone through the previous 2 sessions videos only, and if that is the case, if you have any questions, please let me know. We can talk on that. Any questions from anyone, please?
Hi, Lakshman.
Yeah.
Just a small clarification.
Please.
So we are creating the implementation user from the IDM or the security console.
No, don't call as IDM. Others will get confused. We didn't discuss about IDM. Once I get into the application, I'll talk about IDM. We don't have in R12 and release 12 and release 13. That is is available up to release 11 only. That point also I'll touch for your information. But don't use the term call as IDM. No IDM here.
Okay.
Yeah. Security console. You can say security console. Now IDM part they merged with the security console from release 12.
Yeah, that's what my.
You might have come across with the previous releases. Yes. So from release.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, just for information. You're clear, right? Okay, done. So any other questions, please? Any questions from anyone, please? Okay, I'll be available in this meeting for 5 more minutes. And any questions from anyone, please go ahead with that. Otherwise, done with that. Yeah. Please.
Hello. Yeah. Can we? I would like to have a separate call just to ask some specific questions on the previous session.
Fine. We'll give you.
Whenever
We'll give you a call after this meeting. You can expect the call within 10 minutes. Yeah.
Okay. Do I have to give my number?
I think our team has your number. Okay, I'll get from them and I'll give it.
Thank you.
Yeah, fine.
Thank you.
Fine. Any questions from anyone?
Yeah. Yeah, the other day in the first session, we discussed about you have access to application customization, the functionality customization. My question is, in that pass, database access is not there. So if I say develop a custom web page that is going to insert data into a custom table, then is that possible in PAS? Because you have to create table and display that in database.
PAS will get you will have access for database also. Your database related access you don't get through third-party tools. You cannot query the data. You cannot connect through Toad or some other tools which are third party, or even Oracle tools also. Everything need to be done within the environment only. So you'll get databases. See, otherwise if you are developing one function, so you have to create the table, right, to store the respective function data or process related data or new application related data. You'll get database access to create the tables and all. You won't have access to integrate, okay, the connectivity with some other tools to query the data from cloud database to some other tools. That's how it works.
Okay, so the SQL developer enables us to query for information and try our scripts. So likewise, Oracle itself is providing any tool for PaaS?
PaaS, we have that BI catalog environment within the instance only. So that will facilitate you to write any queries or to do any kind of
okay,
procedure or any.
Okay, that makes
you can write. In our session,
okay, that makes sense.
We'll see in our sessions. So we are going to cover from
okay, and
queries. Yeah, please.
Okay, and another last question from my end is, in yesterday's session, you had listed the job role, the duty role, and the data role. Correct. And you told that till R11 only the data role was there. Then from R12 and R13, the data role is not there.
From 12
not. So you knew that. So today, yeah. So the question is more in terms of, okay, today we are learning R13 or R12 from you. And after the training is over and everything, when any change happens in, say, in R14, how are we to grasp or research or understand what are the changes that Oracle has made to the newer version, basically the difference between, say, R13, the version we learned in the training, versus a newer version.
I got your question. And the first point is generally Oracle won't go and do changes for fundamental or basic things. Now we discussed the data roles are not available from 12. They didn't take the decision, they didn't do this change in very short period. After introducing the product into market after 4 years, they did this change. Okay, so if you want to get to know any changes which may happen in upcoming releases, normally simply they don't change in very short periods, this kind of fundamental things. But anything you can find out from the Oracle support website, Metalink. The Metalink, if you come across there is some new version released from Oracle, what are the changes, what new they introduced, what enhancements they did, that you can find in the Metalink, or just simply call it as Oracle support website.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, fine. So any other questions, please?
Last question is, what is the difference between employee user and this contingent user?
Yeah, tell me, please.
What is the difference between the employee user and the contingent user?
It's all about employee classification. That is reality. We don't call it as employee user and contingent worker. When you are creating employee user, you can make it as an employee. That means full-time employee. When you select contingent worker, that is part-time employee. Because of contingent worker, we are not naming it as a contingent user. Okay.
It's nothing but a contractor.
Employee user, the employee can be full-time employee or part-time employee, contract employee.
Okay.
Yeah, contingent means contract employee. That's what we represent.
Okay.
Yeah. Fine. Any other questions, please?
Lakshman, this is regarding the classification of roles in cloud. So can you just give an idea about the classification of roles in clouds, how it is broadly classified and those things?
Yeah, these are the 4 roles. These are the 4 roles, the broad classification: job roles, duty roles, data roles, abstract roles. As we discussed earlier, the job roles are equal to EBS menu. The duty roles, which you see in the Fusion, those are equal to EBS submenus. And the data roles, which we have till release 11 version, it's a combination of job role and your operating unit or your primary ledger. The same I just mentioned here. Abstract role, it's just role which which is a commonly used. When you say talk about job roles or duty roles or data roles, these would be specific to application. But when you talk about abstract role, nothing but employee. The people may work for any department, but still you can assign the role called as abstract role. The role name is employee. Payables who will be working, they are employees only. Receivables who will be working, employees only. For any application, okay, who will be working, definitely that employee only will be working. For common, okay, the role is abstract role. That on this we don't need to focus on that. It will have some additional privileges. Primarily these are the points you have to understand. Just when you talk about count number, you can talk about these 4 we have, but this data roles we have till 11 only. From 12 they remove data role. With the data role, what we can achieve, automatically system will assign our business unit or primary ledger to respective roles that they stopped, that provisioning they stopped from release 12. In 12 till 11, what system do that, we have to do it. That's it. Manually we have to assign our primary ledger to require specific ledger specific roles, and our business unit BU specific roles we have to assign. So that's how there is no data role concept in from release 12. Okay, this is a broad classification.
Yeah, thank you, Lakshman.
Yeah, thanks.
So, after this cloud, they remove the profile option, or do we still have the profile
still
option?
we have profile option, but usage drastically they reduced. See, in EBS, if you are going to do the multi-or configuration, so we use a few basic profile options, right? Say GL ledger name and HR user type, MO operating unit, MO security profile, okay, HR business group, HR security profile. These are very basic profile options. Without using single profile option, what we discussed just now, you can complete the required enterprise structure configuration, which is equal to multi-org structure in EBS. Still profile options we have, the usage drastically they reduced. Based on the configuration only, these definitions will get a sync. Okay, that's how we have. We'll see that. I'll even those are not very much mandatory. There are a few areas where we can use the profile option to set something as a default. Okay, for that reasons, we'll go through that profile options also. Okay, any questions from others, please? Okay, seems to no questions. We'll connect tomorrow same time, and we'll just continue from here. Maybe tomorrow also we'll be focusing on understanding these topics. So after.
Are you guys changing the time, or we're keeping the same? I think
Sorry?
the same time is better.
Same time, same time.
Are you
Connect same time tomorrow also.
same time, right?
Yeah.
You're saying that we're gonna change the time.
Not
timing,
now, as we informed after maybe after 2 to 3 weeks there. Okay, fine.